Yeah, do you mind me asking you a few questions first? Maybe just some
Yeah.
interesting stuff that's maybe not related, but I just read through all your information. Seems like you do a lot of stuff for the community online, which is super nice to see. I had a few questions in terms of your, you have obviously the two main ones, AWS and Netlify, and I saw 2 Sigma there, which is quite interesting because that's kind of completely opposite. That's financial sector stuff, right? So how was it working in such a huge financial institution?
So I actually worked at a internal startup inside of 2 Sigma. So it was
Interesting.
cordoned off from the main unit. So it was a internal startup within there, and I was a front-end developer there. And yeah, it was a good experience. They paid very, very well. But ultimately, I didn't like the product we were working on, which is like an insurance tech company. So I prefer working on developer tools. So I just pivoted to that.
Yeah, I see that. I was reading through quite a couple of things you actually were working on your site. And I see you have a lot of articles, talks, tutorials, helping in the community and stuff. How do you keep motivated for that stuff? It's like, it's not just a time constraint, right? At some point you like really have to like have so much motivation to keep that up. Just for myself, because I'm one of the most demotivated people around. So
I think it's very motivating when people ask you, like, you know, when you're invited to speak, like, you know, in a place like this. I remember that, you know, I was not so long ago, I was in a position where I would have given anything to be in a place that I am now. So I never take it for granted, never. And I really want to make the most out of it and give my best in terms of like my thinking or like what I know about, even though I am not an expert in a lot of things. I've probably spent more time on certain topics of interest than other people, and as long as they find it helpful, I'm happy to share it. And I get a lot of my learnings from the feedback that people give me. And then I basically take that as like the next loop, right? It's a continuous virtual cycle of like, okay, here's the diff between where I was before and where I am now. And then I share that. And probably there are a lot of people who also are along on that journey. So I think that's the concept of learning in public that I've really espoused. And I do that across, you know, all my work at Netlify, AWS, and now I'm working at Temporal, which I haven't actually written about because it's a backend technology. And that's something that is gradually evolving for me as well, that I'm broadening out from just front end. And we can talk about that, but I think you guys are a front end focused consultancy.
Yeah, it's still super interesting to hear that you have so much passion for the front end and you're still interested in kind of branching out and growing. As you said, with the same with your topics, right? It's continuous improvement, and whatever you find your interests in it's always nice to kind of dig into that deeper. Cool. Yeah, I mean, it was just a couple of topics that I picked out initially just from the information that you have out there. You're a pretty hard guy to find easily, because the first place I always look is LinkedIn. And it seems like you've actually hidden yourself and kind of quit the LinkedIn thing. So that was interesting. But obviously, besides that, you Google your name and you're everywhere. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. If you're ready to start, I think by now, I'm not exactly sure how many people have joined, but I think we're about nearly 10 minutes in. I think if you're ready.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfectly.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think that was a great running start. And I should probably do this. Yeah, some of this is going to be repeated from the blog post that comes with the talk. But primarily for me, it's a chance to explain to you in context in my own words. And I try to update it every single time I give this talk, because this is a moving target and it's about the future of JavaScript. So I really like to thank everyone. I think Anne from this dot helped put me in touch with you, Dean. And so thanks everyone for coming, and let's talk a little bit about JavaScript and where we are and where we're going to go. So the context is like this, right? Like I tried to do a timeline of major JavaScript developments. I wasn't around for the first half of it, so I have to reconstruct history as much as possible. And apologies if I left out your favorite tool. But it's pretty clear that there are distinct chunks to how JavaScript evolved, and it roughly breaks down to 10 years each. I played a bit fast and loose with like the gaps. Like 2008, there was other stuff going on in the world, so let's call it a break there. 2020 also looks like a significant break, so maybe we should leave a year in between every 10 years. But I think this is the framing of this, right? Like try to speculate about like where we've been and what we're gonna go towards. And I think we can see certain trends that are evolving pretty clearly now. So this talk is structured in 5 parts. They're not all the same. The first age, the first 10 years, the second age from 2009 to 2019, which we just finished. And then the 2 parts of the third age that I really focus on, which is ES modules and polyglot tooling. And then finally, some speculation on the death of JavaScript, if it ever happens. We don't know. Okay, so the first stage of JavaScript really is covering from its birth. The key talk I always point people to is this talk by Brendan Eich, who presented on a brief history of JavaScript. So highly recommend checking this out, because who better to learn the history of JavaScript from than the guy who created it. The primary thing, I think, which is a very weird thing for like the most popular language on earth to discover, is that it was more or less by accident. Like Brendan wanted to design Scheme in the browser, and then he was ordered to do JavaScript, and it was made to look like Java just because that Java was the popular language at the time. There's so many accidental things about JavaScript that have just become to be part of the lore, and it's just a really interesting historical fact. Probably the next 10 years are about fixing design mistakes that are potentially fixable in there. So really, the next 10 years, this is the best chart I can find of the formalization of JavaScript. So the first few years, I started to count in 1997. Actually, the history goes a little bit beyond that, because the formalization as ECMAScript was in 1997. Then we did 1 a year, and then we just paused because we had this internal war over the future of JavaScript between ECMAScript 3.1 and ECMAScript 4, and really we just abandoned it, and really it was ECMAScript 5 that started the whole modern version of JavaScript that we know today. And really that this limbo period is where it's really interesting to dive into, especially for someone like me, who I was marginally aware of some of these, but then I didn't use it for my day job. Maybe some of you did in the room, so you can really resonate. I think there's basically the believers, and then like the people who want to fork the language. So it was either dialects or going with standard JavaScript and then modifying the prototypes of that language. And it turns out that obviously jQuery won, but there was a very strong fight with ActionScript for a long time. And I think the pivotal turning point in like this internal war between JavaScript was 2008 in Oslo. In the depths of the financial crisis, everyone who was anyone got together in Oslo and actually resolved this debate between ECMAScript 3.1 and ECMAScript 4. And they said, all right, this is not going anywhere. We've been fighting for so long. Let's actually work on ECMAScript Harmony, which is eventually ES5. If you want to find out more details, check out the book that was written about the first 20 years of JavaScript by Alan Worsbrock and Brendan Eich. This is a 200-page book, so nobody's read it, but I've browsed through it, and there's a lot of detail that's preserved here for all time by the people who were primarily responsible for early version of JavaScript, and then Alan was the principal author or editor for ES5 and 6. Okay, then we moved on to the second age of JavaScript, because once we received, we reached some kind of harmony. In that same year, 2009, we standardized ES5. We came up with CommonJS. we launched Node.js. This is Randall at JSConf. And we also launched NPM. All this happened in the same year, 2009, and we still use these today. So we're well past a decade from this period. And it makes you think about what the 2009 of the modern age should be, because we're still using these tools and we're kind of feeling the limitations of all of them. We've already moved on from ES5 to ES6, but there's so many other pain points that we can think about and that we've learned in the past 10 years. There are 4 segments of the 10 years that I really focus on. So first is the runtimes, right? We built out the number of places that JavaScript can run on. Fun fact, Chrome also started in 2009. Electron on the desktop, React Native in mobile phones, and even customized JavaScript runtimes, Hermes from the Facebook React Native project. We also built out build tools. So the early build tools were superseded by lighter weight stuff, and then eventually the newer forms of bundlers that eventually emerged. I really like this as a form of like this is this beginning of like the build tools war in JavaScript, right? Because one of the appeals of JavaScript is that as a scripting language, you should be able to drop it in the browser, but that's not the way most of us write JavaScript today. We write some kind of weird syntax that is then run through a build tool, and then outputs a build target for running on the web. I think to some extent this is irreversible. There are a lot of people who bemoan the death of view source, but we have that ship has sailed. We can ship source maps and stuff like that to fix it, but ultimately we have to respect that the production demands of the kind of apps that we ship today require a build tool, just like every other programming ecosystem. Then we also have frameworks. So obviously this is the frameworks that front-end developers all love and use. I'm very partial to Svelte, and we can talk about that in our Q&A, because I have had a journey. I started with Vue, and then I moved to React, and I specialized in React for a long, long time. And then I realized that that's not the end state of things. And I think I wanted to explore the next frontier. Finally, I have a couple talks if you want to dive deeper into like the JS tooling ecosystem. So both of these are on YouTube. Svelte and the Great Space Elevator is my discussion about the difference between Svelte and the other frameworks. And then Growing a Meta Language is my discussion about how all the frameworks, not including React, but the other frameworks as well, are shifting left in terms of their the way that they compile and the way that they surface developer errors, and it makes for a faster developer loop, and that's something that we are trying to optimize for our future. Okay, so now we come to the third age, where in short, we're trying to rimwrap legacy. One of my readers actually mocked this up. Apparently, this is a very famous Lord of the Rings game. I never played it, but happy to. I think this graphic looks awesome. There are 2 things that are going away, which is common JS and JS tooling. So let's talk about each of those in turn. So the first part is the rise of ES modules and the death of IE 11. Most people here probably already know ES modules, so I'm going to skip this. But if you haven't been using them natively and you've just been using them through something like Webpack, now is the time to really bone up on them, because they are about to be native in a lot of the tooling that we use. So check out the V8 docs on this, check out the MDN docs on this. ES modules are really great. They're a native module system that's standardized, but they still have limitations. So even the V8 team don't recommend using ES modules in production. They still want you to bundle. Still, while you're in development mode, you don't have to bundle. So that's the rise of all these build tools that are sort of unbundlers for dev mode, and then bundle for your production mode. But the problem, the main limitation when using all this stuff, this ES modules, is Internet Explorer, because it's supported everywhere else except IE. So partially the rise of ES modules is going to be dependent on the death of IE. And it's slowly happening, and I think it could be this year. So right now, I think, there's all these famous, there's all these, well-known companies, and I keep a list on Twitter. So if you want to check, there has a peer company of mine. If you want to make the case for dropping IE11 at one of your clients, you can tell them that Twitter dropped it, WordPress dropped it, Drupal dropped it, Adobe, Dailymotion, Microsoft itself has dropped IE11, as well as Vue 3 and Angular as well. It seems like React is the last one to drop IE11. Make of that what you will. But primarily the catalyst I'm looking for this year, 2021, is the US government dropping IE11 support. So their rule is that you have to support any browser that has visits of more than 2%. And this has been dropping a lot. So as of November last year, it was at 3.6%, and it's dropped all the way to 2% today. It's had some periods where it's below 1.9, 1.8%. So we're already there. I think the wall is collapsing faster and faster, and it accelerates because people just see that this is the tipping point. Like all of these were filed this year. And I'm pretty sure that once the US government drops IE11, that will be a catalyst for a lot of legacy companies to also just say like, all right, this is the year. We know that it has to happen by 2025, 2027-ish, because that is the official end of life of Windows 10 for which IE11 is tied to. But I think it will in practice end much earlier because Microsoft is pushing very hard for this. Okay, and even Edge has Internet Explorer mode, which I think will accelerate the adoption of this because you now no longer have to spend any money to do this. You can just use Edge, and then if you need to use a legacy app that it only works on IE, you can use IE mode. So I think that's a really good development. It just takes a while to roll out. Okay. Regardless of all of that, I think ES modules adoption is really happening. So this is ES modules adoption in the browser, and this is ES module adoption in Node.js, which is as of Node 14, which is now the current version of Node. It is unflagged and available everywhere. So Syntrasaurus is rewriting all of his 1,000+ modules into ESM and no longer shipping CommonJS. And I think that'll be a key catalyst for the rest of the toolchain to move along as well. Okay, the next section, which is the new tooling that is coming out of it. I think the common misconception was that you used to have to write JavaScript tooling in JavaScript. It's kind of like by JavaScript developers for JavaScript developers, and that's no longer the case. So we're taking away this assumption, and we're also taking away this other assumption of Unix philosophy that one tool should do one job well, or we're really kind of re-examining what the job is. So first of all, I think the case for saying JS tools should be written in JS, I used to have to fight this fight of like, hey, I want to write it in TypeScript, but then people will come back to me and say like, oh, but that increases the learning barrier, so no. And I think that's no longer the case in 2021. Everyone is more or less on board with TypeScript. It's intentionally easy to learn for a JavaScript developer, and most of the ecosystem already uses it. In fact, now the use case is flipped, and so people won't use a library if it doesn't have TypeScript types. So it's a very different environment from at least even like 3-4 years ago. We can also think about ES build. So this is the thing about polyglot tooling, where basically Evan Wallace from Figma, as a side project, decided that Webpack was way too slow. So he decided to write his own bundler in Go and look at the benchmarks. It's about 100 times faster than what's run in JS. And I think this makes a lot of sense that we ultimately rewrite a lot of our core tooling in compiled languages. And yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's happening slowly. So Deno is majority in Rust, Relay is in Rust, Volta is in Rust, and there's a lot of tooling that's slowly evaluating adopting Rust. I think the other day, Parcel V2 also just announced that they're rewriting their core to Rust as well. So it's just faster tooling for all of us. For those of us who don't contribute to these, it's just a free performance upgrade, but obviously it's a huge learning curve for the people who are maintaining these tools. Ultimately, I think what's happening is that we used to have this idea of purity. We must have JS all the way down the stack, but it's kind of silly because we can actually just rewrite the core in a non-JS systems language. And this is a hot path. This is run many, many times over. So we need to optimize this to be as fast as possible. But the external API, the API that we as developers use, that can still be in JS, and that's fine. So I think my phrase for this is systems core scripting shell. And I think that's what a lot of polyglot tooling is going to start looking like as well. So exactly like this, systems core and then scripting shell. When we only interact with the shell. The other part I think about Unix, the Unix philosophy, is that we don't actually know, or the definition of what a job is has solidified quite a lot because we've been using these things for 10 years. So fun fact, in the olden days, kind of when word processors first came out, word counts, footnotes, and charts were all separate plugins that you had to pay separately for, right? And now these are all just standard features within a standard word processing software component. So what I mean to say by this is that the definition for one tool for one job changes when the job changes, right? Like, so I think what really is happening here is that the job is expanded, or we use all these things together because we know so much about how to do software now, that it just doesn't make sense to keep wiring up like ESLints with Prettier with TypeScript and then have like 5 different config files in your repo. It doesn't make sense. Let's have one tool that just understands how all these things work together. So basically this is the pitch deck. Why are all these things different things with all different maintainers, and a combinatorial explosion of all the different configs? Let's just have one tool that does all that. So the one way you can do this is to sweep it all under a rug, and there's a little bit of what Create React App is. In fact, fun fact, one of my first talks was about creating Create React App, where I covered the history of this. You can also bundle it as distros. So this is another talk of mine where I cover a little bit about how Create React App is essentially a bundle of React and DevTools. And then you bundle routing into it, and you get Next.js and Gatsby, and then you bundle some more full stacky components. You get Blitz.js and Redwood.js, and this follows a rough S curve, which is this technology adoption theory, which is where like we used to have this joke about like, oh, there's a new framework that comes along every month. That's no longer the case. Probably Svelte and Stimulus were the last well-known frameworks to really come out and start to shape the conversation. But since then, most of the innovation is atop of a core kernel, which is standardized to be React. So this is the difference between the installment age and the deployment age. That's a framework by Carlotta Perez. If you're interested in that, there's a lot of applications about how technologies roll out in this sort of 2-phase format. And the best time to get involved in the technology is right about here, when it's just about to go on this massive explosion. Okay, so yeah, we're going to collapse all these layers. This is taken directly from the Rome Tools slide deck when they did their fundraising. So literally what I had there, but with more logos, and then they're just collapsing it all into one tool. Deno as well is going to fold things like formatting and testing all into a single binary, and that's just really great. There's a thesis for this that I have called Collapsing Layers, and you can read more in the blog post about that. I think the last thing that probably has changed most recently for me is observing that people are trying to innovate on open source business models and funding. So Deno and Rome are now both backed by venture capital. That's not new. NPM used to be backed by venture capital as well, and that did not work out. But I think people are trying to innovate in terms of like how they support or open source, because previously it was kind of like on the maintainers' own free time, and it's a little bit exploitative. So I think there are other ways of doing it as well. So Remix by Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson is exploring sort of the paid subscription model, which is nothing new as well. Like we used to have it in the jQuery days as well, and I think it's good. I don't know what's going to win. I'm not sure that VC is like the best way to do these things, but at least they're trying. And we should probably have a lot more attempts at funding sustainable open source. Okay, so finally, this is like the most wishy-washy thing. What will be the death of JS if it ever dies? What's our end game here? I think the best talk on this, if you haven't seen it, is the birth and death of JavaScript, where he actually more or less charts the path towards from JavaScript to WebAssembly, and that's something that Brendan Eich himself has started to say as well. So he said he used to say always bet on JavaScript, but now he says always bet on JavaScript and WebAssembly. And I actually had a brief chat with him on this, where we talked about what is the universal virtual machine, that the code that you can really write once and run anywhere. And he says like, yeah, it's probably WebAssembly. So that's probably something to think about long term. I don't know that it will kill JavaScript, but it will probably replace a lot of the things that we use JavaScript for, which is we have to use it to write web applications. That is no longer the case today, and it will be increasingly no longer the case the more types of languages can compile to WebAssembly. Yeah, with that, I'm just going to leave it there. If you're interested in spotting more trends like this and talking about text strategy, I write a lot about it in my own book. So you can find that at learninpublic.org, and you can find me in all these social details. But thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks, Shawn. That was really interesting. Quite nice to see. A lot of the time you kind of, spotlighted. Okay. I was wondering if I was accidentally muted and I had a pop-up saying no one can actually hear you. I hate it when I talk to myself in meetings. Anyway, a lot of the time you use a lot of these tools and you aren't really aware of how quickly everything else is changing around you, at least coming from a backend. Coming from backend, not a backend in specific, but when you hit the JavaScript infrastructure, you just kind of see, okay, I'm working on React, and you work on React for like a year, and maybe you see a couple of small frameworks, new frameworks coming out. But when you take a look at the bigger picture like this, you just realize how kind of overwhelming it can be. I looked into Rome.js previously. I did a small introduction talk on that. Super interesting. Or Rome. I always call it Rome.js, but I don't think it is JS anymore. It's just a Rome.
Rome tools.
Yeah. One question from my side, just before we start the Q&A, was we were looking into ESBuild as well, and I've got quite some experience with Vue, and Vite is looking really promising, and it's built by the developer of Vue. Do you have any experience with that, or is it just something that you've looked into?
We've tried out Vite, and it's so it kind of goes like this: is ESBuild at the core, which is the core bundler tool. Yeah. Vite is the development experience that's built on top of it, or the unbundler framework that's built on top of it. I mean, it seems like the emerging winner in this space of the unbundler tools, but the other competitor is Skypack, which people should also check out. Actually, I think it's called Snowpack, so it's a little bit confusing. Skypack is the company that runs the module system, and then Snowpack is the tool that actually does the unbundling. But either way, both of these tools are trying to take advantage of this new third Age of JavaScript assumptions, which is that you no longer have to, you can just assume ES modules, especially in development time.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's super cool. It's a great development in my opinion. Interestingly enough, you mentioned Deno quite a couple of times. We're actually going to be having Luca Casonata from Deno doing a talk for us at the end of next month, so that should be pretty interesting.
I think that the thing that people are probably too excited about Deno, in the sense that Deno is an alternative runtime for JS, but Node is just everywhere right now, and it's very trusted and well known. It's going to take a long time for Deno to ever replace Node, and probably will never. Node is going to be like our Internet Explorer. So like, less secure, needs updates, doesn't do as much as newer runtimes, but it's going to be around forever. So we just have to be prepared to be conversant in both Node and Deno for our projects.
Yeah, as I said before as well, the front-end community is so excited about new stuff, and it's just exploding at the moment that as soon as you mention something new and shiny, everyone kind of wants to jump into it. So hopefully there's a little bit of a push at the start for that. Okay, yeah, sorry, getting carried away. I guess I can go into some Q&A now if you if you're ready for that.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, one of the questions is quite, I would say, quite an obvious one, which is a good one to ask. Why do you think Rust is so common and used so much?
Honestly, I don't do Rust, so I'm not the best person to answer this. I can speculate. Part of it is the easy joke is that Rust, lets you do fearless concurrency, and Rust programmers will never let you forget it. Like every few weeks, they'll say like, "Hey, did you know Rust is the best?" But Rust has a very good reputation, and it seems to have beat out some of the other. Like nobody wants to write, C++ or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think that's it. There's a rolling snowball of like some initial traction, and then the more people love it publicly, then it just builds up excitement. And at this point, Rust is on this like a breakaway trend compared to other languages, even including Go. So yeah, Rust he seems to be used so much because other people use Rust, and everyone else is like, okay, I got to pick a systems language, and out of all these other languages that are available, I rather play with Rust since it seems like other people are very excited about it. There's a little bit of recursive effect to these things.
Yeah, the excitement kind of expands the more people use it. Yeah, no, that's I also have no experience with Rust, so it's interesting to hear. Cool.
I should also mention that Rust is sort of a first-class citizen to compile to WebAssembly if that requirement ever comes up, which, for example, like for the GraphQL tools, it might be relevant. Anything that you might potentially want to compile to WebAssembly, because they were both developed together at Mozilla, it is the natural choice for that specific use case. The reality is that we're not actually doing that, but it's a nice to have.
There's hope. You can see my puppy also interested in in Rust. Yeah, another question from Abe. Do you have any idea when WASM will take off? As in when and how it will be adopted?
I mean, it's slowly getting adopted. If you use Figma at all, it's in WebAssembly. And there's, I think it would just be like, not, it will be adopted hopefully for the right reasons, which is for very high performance, like very complex web applications, because those are the ones that need it. The rest of us who are working on basic CRUD apps for insurance companies and stuff like that, should just use JavaScript, and we're fine with that. It's totally acceptable. I think the other thing that's super interesting about WebAssembly is that it was originally designed as a runtime for the browser, or like the browser's like 5th official language. But it may actually have a lot more use in the server, which is something I was very counterintuitive, but because of the security model and it's so limited, it actually makes a lot of sense for running in server environments. So I would pay attention to WASI, the WebAssembly system interface, for that. But all these are definitely still frontier.
Interesting, WebAssembly for the backend. Cool, thank you. Another one from Michelle. What role do you think web components will play in the third age and beyond?
Oh, no idea. What do you think?
I don't want to be rude. I don't like web components. I don't want to get into that discussion, so I'm gonna skip it.
Yeah,
but yeah,
they have web components have an unfair advantage. The problem is that in order to do basic things like server-side rendering, you still need a framework that compiles to web components. So you might as well just use the framework from the start, and the use case of web components is very limited. I think probably what will happen, something I'm very interested in, is Chrome basically pioneering new web components, like a virtual scroller web component that they've been talking about. They also recently introduced a proposal for a page transition web component, or page transition API that uses a web component. Basically, like the more Chrome shows the possibilities as a leader in the space, and people realize like, okay, like I can, instead of writing, Vue dash whatever, React dash whatever, Svelte dash whatever, I can just write the shared thing in this library, and then people can use this as a web component, irrespective of framework. That seems to make sense, but it is a long way away. There are a number of other problems with web components using in practical production environments. So check out Rich Harris's blog post on this, on why he doesn't use web components.
I'm actually going to write that down. Cool. We have quite a lot of questions actually. We got one from Ito. Have you heard about Remix Run? What are your thoughts on paying for a framework license, specifically in a world where all other frameworks don't have this paywall?
Yeah, I mentioned this in the talk, but essentially I'm positive on it. It will not be the biggest thing in the world, but it will make a small amount of people happy, and that's all they have to do. So it's a very bootstrapper mentality to simplify React development, and I'm supportive of that. Yeah, the problem is that the impact is going to be limited, right? It's not really going to change the way that web development is done because it's a relatively expensive license, and most people who learn web development cannot afford it. But I think some companies which have that problem, particularly agencies, should definitely check it out.
Cool. Thanks. I actually have never heard of it, so it's kind of interesting to hear.
Check out. They did a live stream of their. I think they were in like public beta or something. It was like a 1.5 hour stream where they show you how they simplify some things. So the idea is that React developers typically reinvent a lot of the web protocols. For example, form submission, you have to use like an on submit handler and then like do all that stuff. Whereas you can actually just use like an action and preserve a lot of that progressive enhancement capability, as well as reducing a lot of the manual state management that you have to do with regards to form submission.
Cool. Which we also tend to try and overcomplicate.
Yeah. I will say, Tyler, I'll give you a freebie, which I don't talk about publicly. I think it's very worrying for the health of the React ecosystem that the primary authors of the main router that, React router, are no longer working on React router. React router has not been updated in the past year or so, and that's something that they've owned up to. They're prioritizing Remix over React router, and so that means React no longer has an independent router system. You either have to choose Remix or Next.js. Gatsby has a router, but Gatsby is also on the way out. So yeah, it's a very weird system to be in because React is no longer a useful library without all the other frameworks have their own router included into it, and React router used to be the solution for this as an independent solution. Now you just have to pick something that both of these, like either Vercel, which is venture funded, or Remix, which you have to have a pay license for. There's no middle option.
Well, was this is not a question from anyone else, but was this one of the reasons that you kind of stopped using React and decided to move on to Svelte?
No, Svelte has a lot of other benefits. This is just a reflection on React router itself.
That's interesting. It's yeah.
I have a separate blog post about why. I have a separate blog post about why Svelte, which is at a minimum, like it's much lighter in terms of framework footprint. So like a typical React installation would have like 120 kilobytes uncompressed, whereas Svelte only bundles in the functionality that you end up using. So like my site can be like 3 to 9 kilobytes. So that seems like the responsible thing to do. But then it also bundles in standard things like styling, right? Like Rich Harris said this, which really sold me, was like it seems like a web framework should have styling solutions involved, and I'm so tired of picking like linearia styled components, emotion, astroturf. Like there's all these different styling solutions, and then there's CSS modules and Tailwind and all that. And let's just have a good styling solution that is also componentized. Vue and Svelte and I think Angular have also arrived at this conclusion, and I don't know why React is just refusing to do it. So I'm fed up with it. That's all.
Well, with Nuxt on the install for the create Nuxt, basically, there's also like a list of, I think, 8 or 9 different CSS frameworks or helpers or libraries that you can install. And actually doing that is always like, where do I start? You could always choose the one you like the most, but yeah. Cool,
I mean,
thanks.
and to be fair, I also use Tailwind.
Okay.
But having a scoped styling solution seems necessary in this day and age. There's also mutability. There's also inbuilt state management. There's also sugar syntax for binding, two-way binding of forms. These are all things that, because React refuses to have an opinion on them, you compensate a lot by just typing a shit ton of code that is super boilerplate. And like once you've done it the other way, there's just no point doing it. Like I've actually tried to do a prototype of what's like a svelte like DSL for React would look like. If anyone wants to do that, be my guest. But I'm just not even trying to use React anymore. So.
Okay, you sound a little bit upset about React, but
I'm not. I still use it at work, but I wouldn't use it on a new project.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting. It's interesting to hear from someone who, as you said yourself, you like spent many years investing time into it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty weird because like I still get a lot of invites for like React conferences. I just gave a talk at React Summit this year, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people make their money from React, and I'm not going to make them feel bad about it. But when you try these new frameworks and see how more productive you are, a lot of times this, like what people play with today is going to be what people work on tomorrow. So are you betting on like the job market or the industry as it is today, or are you betting on the industry as it is tomorrow? And for me, at least, I have a level of comfort where like I can probably get any React job I want. So I no longer care about it because I have that security. I can go play with other things. I'd much rather play with other things.
Yeah, it's nice to have that confidence. We have one hand up from Sui, so maybe if we can give him a second to ask this question.
Hey, I posted this question in a Q&A, but let me ask it here. What do you think about a Dart? And because being backed up by Google, and they actually created a language and the framework over it, right? So what do you think about it?
Yeah. So my relationship with Dart is like I've done some demos with it at AWS, and I'm also an investor in Flutter Flow, which was most recently featured at Google I/O. I mean, so people like to give Google a lot of crap for sunsetting things, but Dart is it's not a new language at this point. It may be new to people who write JavaScript, but it's not a new language. And Google builds a lot of critical infrastructure on Dart, including, I think, its ad system. So Dart is not going away. The key question is Flutter going away, or is Flutter a viable thing to invest in? Right now, it is not. Right now, it is still very janky, even though it's still is at its 2.0 stage. It's terrible on the web. And its primary use case is as a cross-platform compile language for iOS and React and Android. And people still complain about its performance on iOS, but it is getting better every single year. And the key thing to look out for is, does it do a better job of the ecosystem than React Native? And it's not obvious to me that React Native is winning at all. If you look at the number of there's some metrics like the number of people asking questions on Stack Overflow, or like the Google search trends. Flutter seems to be doing better than React Native in a lot of these. Obviously, React Native has the benefit of the JS ecosystem, but they seem to be fumbling a little bit in the community aspect. I hesitate to make stronger statements than that because I'm not a member of the React Native community, and they had to execute a very tough transition to this sort of lean core approach. So essentially, betting on Flutter means that you're betting on a tighter integrated ecosystem that Google hopefully can manage for you. There also seems to be partially like a generational thing. It seems like the younger kids are adopting Flutter more than the older React Native thing. I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure how they did their developer evangelism, but that's as much as I know about it. It seems like a nice language. I really like the integrated tooling. It's just not this. If you're coming into it expecting a lot of JavaScript ideas to transfer over, then you're going to be in for a shock.
Okay, yeah, just to be like, if I ask you to rate your best native technology other than the native technology itself, what would you rate?
Could you clarify a little bit, Sue?
Yeah, I mean to say that not
mean,
rating
including like C# or
yeah, not C# or something. If I say like a React Native or Flutter or I don't know Ionic or Native Script, like what would be your like a top list?
I cannot do that. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
My answer would be meaningless because I haven't tried Native Script or the other one, Ionic.
Cool.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Shawn.
Yeah. Well, why don't you try it? Let me know.
Yeah. That's a hard one because that means you need to be skilled in all of them to have some.
No, you can try it out.
Objective.
You can spend a weekend on each, and within a month you'll have an opinion. And that's probably more than.
It's an opinion, right? So it's quite subjective. So I think you might see it in a different light as someone else who spends exactly the same amount of time on each. It's a very hard thing to share opinions on, I think. Of course, there's pluses and minuses for each, but yeah. Okay, another question from Jürgen. Is there a threat of lock-in with these suits such as Deno and Rome? And I mean, I could already probably answer that and say yes, but maybe lock-in isn't something you should be worried about when you're moving to something progressively newer.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe what's your say on that, Shawn?
Yeah, I would agree. As someone who works for vendors, I do spend a lot of my time arguing against locked in, or like it's like lock-in is fine if it gives you enough benefits, right? You have to lock yourself into something because the opposite of lock-in is locking into your own tool chain, which is you're not going to maintain it as well as some other people. So yeah, you're locked into something at the end of the day, whatever it is. So just it's not a question of a threat of lock-in. It's just like, are you, is this thing a good thing to lock into? And that's up to you. I would just say that both of these tools are run by the people who made Node.js and made Babel and made Yarn. So what better track record do you have that's better than them?
Yeah, it's true. It's basically you either build your own opinionated toolkit or you use one that's adopted by an entire community. Yeah, I think at this point you can't really be scared about stuff like that because everything's moving so quickly.
I will say, before I sound too much of a fanboy, project governance. Project governance really matters. A project can fall apart if the primary founders have a disagreement and so on and so forth, which happened to Node in like halfway through its life, and there's a whole fork and then it came back and all that, and I won't say more apart from look at the history of some of the founders here and make your bets accordingly.
Yeah, there was the whole thing with Express as well, right? At one point.
Yeah. So yeah, you're locking in not just with the tools, but also the people governing the tools. And if it falls apart, then the project starts to die.
Yeah. Cool. Sounds a bit ominous, but you really have to look at it a little bit deeper than.
I mean, I look up to all these people, and to some extent, a lot of people, I think, in web dev look at these as like passive actors. Like they're like, there's all these tools and they have their own independent trajectories, but you probably underestimate the amount of impact that you can have as an active contributor. Yeah. If you want to step up and shape the future of the thing you're betting on, then you have a lot more say. And if you're not willing to and you're just being passive, then you're forever behind the ball on like, oh, is this project dead? Is this project a good one to bet on? Get involved and you will know.
Yeah, I did a short, I mentioned this before, I did a short talk on Rome and like just an introduction to it. And that's one thing that I said as well is you really have to get involved, especially now in this early stage, and you'll have such a big impact of where things go. I think it's really important to have some say, or at least some part of that. if you plan on using it in the future at least. Okay. So we got a question from you. What are your ideas about what software engineering will be like further into the future beyond Rome's generation?
Wow, that's huge. I have no idea. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was the wrong guy for that. I'm very practical. I'm very interested in low code, if that's something that you're interested in. I definitely think that part of my being exploring things beyond front-end development is I feel like we have the same debates over and over again, and I'm very bored by that. I'm looking for more transformational ideas that will change the paradigms which we currently fight in. And so I also think that basically the amount of software that people like, global demand for software more or less doubled during the COVID pandemic, just based on like, e-commerce share of total commerce doubled, and everyone obviously stayed home and all that. And we did not double the total available software engineers in that period of time. And I think just like the long-term trend of this is that we like, something on the order of 0.5% of the population can code. And even if we 10x that, it will be 5% of the population. And people have more software needs than that. So we're unable to 10x the number of software engineers, and our demand for software is bigger than that. So essentially, that's a long way of saying that we have to figure out this low code, no code thing. And the more abstractions that we can build for people who don't even know that they're coding, the better.
Yeah, and I guess that goes back to the framework run. I don't remember what it was called. The license framework that you were talking about for React, that actually just makes it quite a lot easier for developers to get into React without having to worry about a whole lot of.
Yeah, I know. I found that there was a visual builder visual builder tool for React the other day. Let me look it up. What the name is? It's called Plasmic. Yeah, visual builder and design tool for React Next and Gatsby. It's like Figma, but it compiles to or it outputs React components. So it's a pretty interesting idea, but it's still just a design tool. There's no interactivity, so it's just for look and feel.
Interesting. Before I learned to actually program, this was a while back. I'm getting old now, but before I learned to program front-end stuff and especially like interactive websites, that was my endless search, was drag and drop tools for creating websites. And now I look back at that and I think, no, such a bad idea. But it also helps get a whole lot of people on board and interested in actually customizing these things and eventually getting them into the programming, deeper into the programming world. So it's quite nice. Okay, another question from Ye. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Yejun. Do you think Svelte can overtake React?
Probably not.
Why?
Yeah. So one thing is that it's a part-time project of everyone involved. The entire core team is just part-time. And none of us in the Svelte community want it to overtake React. There's a burden that comes with being the biggest framework. You are the default choice of a lot of people coming into code for the first time. And Svelte feels a lot better because it's everybody's second framework. And we come to it having known the problems with other frameworks before, and we come to it by choice. And I think that's something that we want to keep for a long time. So we're not even going to try. Okay,
so you basically would prefer to have more experienced developers that are asking a little bit higher grade questions, so you don't have to kind of teach people every small bit of
and to be clear, like it is very friendly for teaching because Svelte's primary language is HTML. And so people learning HTML, for example, I think the Norway education system is teaching Svelte in their curriculum. So we will have beginners, and we endeavor to be beginner friendly. But overtaking React is a very different burden, meaning that you have a lot more support than we can handle. So yeah, it's not something that I think any of us are interested in.
Okay, that's interesting. I think you might not be interested now, but I think as the community grows, it might be something that you slowly aim towards, not on purpose, but a lot of the time things kind of just.
Yeah, I would say that it would become a very different project by that stage, and probably a different core team. Yeah, whatever it is, that's fine, right? I just think that there is, people always want to be bigger, like the biggest, the best, the size, like best equals biggest. Actually, that's what I'm thinking about, and that's not true. And so it's felt very much embraces the small is beautiful mentality, including the community size.
It's not always a bad thing. Not always a bad thing. It's quite nice. Okay, it's nice to have a community that's quite close knit as well. It means everyone kind of trusts each other. It's not just one big group of people shouting things. Cool. Okay, we got another question from Abe. What's your opinion on the Elm language? Interesting.
What is our opinion on the Elm language? So I'm friendly with Richard Feldman. I have read Evan Cheplicki's. I've watched basically every talk that Evan Cheplicki has ever given, and I've tried it out. I used to do Haskell programming as well, so very on board with the functional idea. It seems to be too niche. That's all. Seems great, like the premise that you'll never have runtime errors, but that's not a problem that I have. Like I do have runtime errors, but people are fine with that and they report bugs and all that. The velocity slow down because I have this mismatch between, like, I have to think about things in Elm and then I have to transpile it to JavaScript and then reverse that loop when bugs happen or when I'm debugging things. It's just too much. Yeah. So unfortunately, Elm seems like a really good language, and I really am super, like, I highly recommend reading Evan's paper on Elm, by the way, because he's the first person to actually really talk about the types of reactive functional programming. Then there are 4 types, and he did this as an undergrad at Harvard, he just is so clear, such a clear thinker that is just really amazing to watch. But there's a class of academic languages that are always theoretically superior that never get used in practice, and I'm just not interested in that. I'm very practical in a sense of, like, can I use this and can I work with people on this? So it may be a superior language, but unfortunately, it's not getting mass adoption.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, it takes a very certain person to be able to very clearly put their thoughts into words, and sounds like it should be.
Read his paper. Yeah, seriously, everyone just go read his on functional reactive programming, and you will understand the differences in, like, RxJS versus Elm versus Haskell. And for someone to find problems with Haskell as an undergrad is just amazing.
Yeah, that's quite impressive. Yeah, I'll check it out. I definitely. Sounds like an interesting paper. Cool. It sounds like we're getting quite a lot of questions today. Hopefully you're not going to lose your voice.
FP, people like this FP topic.
Yeah. Do you think the long-term run with WASM, WebAssembly adoption, the differentiation between front-end and back-end developers will phase out?
No.
Do you think with the long-term adoption of it? Okay.
No. It's a weird question. So first of all, I mean, I don't even know where to start with this. Like, WebAssembly is it's a compile target that front-end people can compile to, back-end people can also compile to. Doesn't really have to do with eliminating the front-end back-end divide or the division of responsibilities. That said, I actually don't believe, I think that front-end and back-end is outdated language, because front-end developers do more than just stuff in the browser. They also handle APIs nowadays and serverless functions, because so much is managed for you by third-party APIs and serverless functions that a lot of companies don't even need back-end developers, and that's fantastic. But also back-end developers, they actually just work on more like platformy things these days, like which with the rise of DevOps. So I have noticed that, especially in the US, the terminology of product engineer and platform engineer has been more preferred. So if you work on products, you are focusing on things that face the users, whereas if you work on platform, you're focusing on things that scale the business. And that seems like a better split than front end versus back end.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I completely agree with that, actually. It's interesting to think about it that way, because I think we're so set in this mentality that a specific language has to be faced at the browser. And now you've said, as you've just mentioned, like Node is basically, you can build an entire server in that. You can build all your APIs in Node stuff. It's all, I mean, JavaScript doesn't really have a target anymore specifically for the browser.
Exactly.
Cool.
I have to take I do have to go. So I guess this is the last question.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. Oh, it actually is the last question. So it was pretty good. There are two more questions, but I think I'm not going to keep you waiting too long. I'm on a roll, so it's Abe again. Do you think functional programming will ever become popular in relation to the traditional object-oriented paradigm?
Yeah, so the simple answer is it already is. Excel is a functional language, and it is the most popular language, right? So it's really about will FP ever become popular for developers? And it kind of is, right? React is an imposition of functional programming principles on UI programming, and RxJS as well. It's very functional reactive. So it is more popular. I don't know, if it's already more popular than object-oriented programming, but it is fairly popular. The problem is that mutation is very nice. It's very easy, and it is the default environment of JavaScript and the DOM. The DOM is very stateful, and you do mutations on the DOM. So as long as you try to do FP, there'll be a impedance mismatch between what you do and what the actual underlying layer does. So you always have an abstraction, and all abstractions have leaks. So you have to be okay with that. And some people will never be okay with that. And that's fine.
It's opinions, right? Whatever you are most comfortable with. Thanks, man. Honestly, it's been super interesting. I actually enjoyed your talk, but the Q&A was also, it was quite nice to have some, let's say, free speak as well. We'll be, just before you go, we'll be having another talk next month with one of the developers from the Deno team, Luca Casanato. So for anyone who's in here right now, you're all invited to join, of course, as well as you, Shawn, if you're interested in listening to that talk. Sure. It's going to be a Q&A, so most of it will just be like this, asking questions, seeing what he has to think about that stuff. Yeah, so thank you for your time. Thanks for the talk. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone else for joining. Super interesting questions. Hope you have a good day and evening, I guess, because it's a bit of a shift for you in time zones.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks, Dean. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Cool.